So the Fed just popped the housing bubble. That's right, guys. Federal Reserve just popped the housing bubble. And ironically enough, the Federal Reserve is the cause of the housing market bubble to begin with. See, back in early 2020, because of the pandemic, because of the shutdowns, millions of Americans not only lost their jobs, and we saw one of the most aggressive spikes in unemployment history. This eventually evolved into a situation where millions upon millions of Americans obtained the opportunity to work remotely. Americans were able to work from home, and Americans were spending a lot more time at home. Well, at the time, the Federal Reserve, the current presidential administration at the time, wanted to avoid an economic collapse. And if you guys can remember that time, no one knew what was going on, except for those in control, of course. Well, during this time, several things took place. Among these things were the reduction of interest rates. So the Fed took aggressive action in reducing the interest rates available for borrowing money. The federal funds rates were reduced drastically. And this is the rate that banks charge other banks to borrow money, and it is the rate that many loans are based off of. And so what this did is this allowed money to be very, very cheap to borrow. This created a boom all of a sudden. And this was perceived by many as an artificial boom. This shutdown allowed many people to work from home, to take new jobs that would allow workers to work from home. And this allowed many people and families to be able to move out of the cities that were under heavy shutdown, heavy restrictions. And so this increased home affordability. This made homes very, very affordable. And this combined with remote work from home policies and the fact that since you didn't have to report to the office, you could live where you wanted to live. You could migrate out of the cities. You can get away from such close human to human contact. You can move out into the suburbs. You can buy acreage. You can build your farms. You could prepare your family for whatever might come going forward. Well, this demand sparked by the Fed's cheap money and Jerome Powell queuing up the money printer, this drove up the demand for homes at an alarming rate to an extent that we've never seen in our real estate history, quite frankly. Home values went up by 40% in many cities over the past 2 years, 40%. And this made many, many families wealthy. This made a lot of families wealthy. This also made a lot of families who didn't hold assets very, very poor. It made life very difficult for a lot of families. This drove up rental prices. Why? Well, as more and more people were finding it difficult to keep up with higher and higher prices, more and more people were forced to rent. Because as these interest rates dropped, this drove up the price of housing very aggressively to the extent that a home would be listed on the market and there was so much more demand than there was supply that one home would hit the market and that single home would receive 20 offers in one day. I mean, heck, some homes actually received over 100 offers in a single day. Now, obviously, only one person could buy the house. So what happened is that the home buyers realized that. And so when they submitted offers, they said, hey, the only way for me to even get looked at is for me to offer more than what the listing price is on this home. So, that might be an extra $5,000. That might be an extra $10,000 on the offer amount. It got to a point where some homes would literally receive offers that were $150,000 to $200,000 over the asking price for a home. So what did this do? This drove up the comps in the area. This increased the value in months, tens of thousands of dollars per home, $20,000, $30,000. It got to a point where real estate in some areas was appreciating, meaning going up in value by over $10,000 every 2 weeks. Like, this was one of the most unsustainable housing bubbles that we've ever seen in our lifetimes. However, the tides have turned. The shift is underway, and Fed Chair Jerome Powell is unleashing interest rates at a rate that we've never seen before. So the epicenter of the housing bubble, the very creators of the housing bubble are now popping the bubble. And so now what we're seeing is a drastic reversal here. We're seeing this massive Fed pivot, and this is where we are right now. Homeowners are listing their properties and they're trying to get out from under them. And these homes are sitting on the market. You don't have 100 buyers lined up at the front door waiting to purchase. But at the same time, renters are yet again getting burned. The American people without assets, the lower middle class, the lower income Americans, middle income Americans, middle class Americans are getting burned yet again. Millions upon millions of Americans now, renters, are receiving letters from their landlords indicating that their rent is going up. And rents are going up from $100 a month, $50 a month. Some people are receiving notices that rent is going up $600 per month. And this is putting families out on the street. To add to that, and part of the reason why this is happening now is because there's so many home buyers, potential home buyers, that are no longer able to qualify to purchase a home. So they're now forced to become renters. Beyond that, now, of course, this is driving up the demand for rental properties. But beyond that, even worse, even scarier is that some families, and I'm starting to see a growing number of this, is that more and more families are reporting that some landlords are selling the properties that they're renting, meaning that the home that they're renting, where they believe that they had a home, where they believe that they could call home and be able to rest their heads, where they could trust that their families had a place to stay, more and more landlords are listing their rental properties for sale. They're trying to bail out of the market. And this bail out of the market is forcing a lot of families out onto the streets with nowhere to go, as the rental market is quite tight in a lot of areas. Not to mention, families that are in these rental properties, they may have gotten into a rental property at a particular rate per month. However, now an unexpected evacuation of the house is needed, and now they need to secure a new rental property to stay in. Well, lo and behold, these renters, these families are now looking for a new place to stay, and they're looking at the rental market and they're seeing that, oh wow, rent is a whole lot more expensive than it was when we signed this lease. We can't afford this extra $400 per month. What are we going to do? We can't be out on the streets. And this is going to be a very cold winter, guys. This is going to be a very cold, metaphorically speaking, literally speaking, cold winter that we're heading forward into. And to make matters worse, you've got all sorts of companies, Walmart, Peloton, multiple banks, multiple retailers, multiple S&P 500 corporations indicating that there will be mass layoffs coming down the pipeline. And so between unexpected evictions, unexpected job loss, minimal savings accounts, minimal emergency funds. Some families don't even have an emergency fund at all. Question is your family prepared? Is your family prepared for what could possibly be coming down the pipeline? As we're seeing the fates for others, could this fate be applicable to you and your family? And you got to ask yourself, I'm sharing information with the community that I want you guys to understand what I'm seeing and what's coming down the pipeline. But this is not to shed fear. This is not to spread fear or anything of the sort. This is to take inventory of what's happening around us so that families can better prepare. This might be the wake-up call. This might be the alarm that families need to really buckle down now and say to themselves, okay, we need to cut back on spending. We need to figure out how to no longer rely on these credit cards to make ends meet. We have to prepare. We need to start building up a cash pile in order to survive this economic storm that's coming down the pipeline. Inflation, recession, it's real and it's getting worse. And the Fed is clearly not able to get a hold over this inflationary and recessionary problem that we're facing. In fact, the Fed is becoming more and more hawkish and is clearly okay with the U.S. economy falling into a recession. Beyond that, the Fed's goal is to crash the housing market. The Fed's goal is to crash the stock market, and the Fed's goal is to drive up inflation. The Fed's goal is to drive up unemployment, which will make it 10 times harder for families. And the families that will be impacted the first are always low-income families. They're always the lower end of the middle class family scale economically. So it's time to really get your butt in gears, guys. I just wanted to kind of spread this wake-up call because this is what we're seeing. We're seeing the likes of Jamie Dimon, JP Morgan Chase Jamie Dimon, sending out more and more warnings about what's headed toward the average American family in terms of the economic future. Recession, continued inflation, and don't get me started on the petrodollar. More on that one going forward. You guys be safe, all right?